Hello friends, it's Paige Evans. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of Paige's Page and the process video. So I am starting with some pattern papers from my Blooming Wild collection with American Crafts. I'm just pointing out the numbers and going to trim them into 1-inch strips, all 12 inches from a 12 by 12 piece of double-sided pattern paper, and I'm trimming 4 1-inch strips from these pattern papers that I chose. Initially, I chose 4 papers, but then at the end, I decided to add one more, which I will show you when we get to that point. But I am focusing on kind of teals, mints, and pinks for this technique, which is ruffles of repetition. That's what we're going to focus on. I have made lots of layouts with scalloped border punches or just types of border punches, and it's a technique that I'll never tire of just because by changing up one small thing you get totally different results. So I am changing the way that I'm going to place these. I'm going to place them in a frame instead of layered down a page like I have done many times in the past. So in my video I'm using a scalloped border punch by Martha Stewart Crafts, but I got it like 20 years ago. So We Are Makers has one that is very similar, which I recommend. And I feel like there's a few other options on the market for this kind of lacy design. So essentially you put it in the punch, you punch it once, and then you move it over so it's aligned with the pattern that's printed right there on the punch. So it's very helpful. If there are any extra tidbits on the sides, you can trim them off with a fine-tipped pair of scissors and then repeat. That's why it's called Ruffles of Repetition. So repeat punching all of your pattern paper strips. Now, if you don't have this exact same border punch, that's okay. You might have a different one, and this technique is great because it'll look awesome with whatever border punch you have on hand, or maybe you even have deco scissors. Raise your hand if you have deco scissors in your stash. What goes around comes around, I'm telling you. So hold on to those supplies. You might feel like you're hoarding them, but I tell you, you'll wish you had them if you let go of them. So I am using, I grabbed one more piece of pattern paper just to add into the mix so that I have 5 different pattern papers of frames. So I'm trimming once again 4 1 by 12 inch, what, tongue twister, 4 12 by 1 inch strips of this pattern paper. Again, from my Blooming Wild collection with American Crafts. And doing the exact same thing where I'm putting it in the punch, punching, nudging it over, lining it up with the printed punch design that's right there on the punch, so it's very handy. And then repeating for all of my paper strips. So this is what it looks like. I have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20 pattern paper strips. For this first set, I am cutting them to 6 inches. So I need 4 6-inch pieces from the first pile. From the next pile, I need 4 7.5-inch strips. And I got smart and I'm stacking them together so I can cut through multiple layers at a time. I think I have 3 stacked together, but for the rest I'll do 2 at a time. So the first pile is 6 inches. The second pile is 7.5 inches. This next pile I am trimming to 9 inches. So I figured out the order that I want my paper strips in first. So it's going from the pink to the light blue to the teal to the dark blue. The next pile, stacking 2 and cutting them to 10.5 inches. Okay. So grab the next 2 and trim them to, I've already forgotten, but it shows right in the video, 10.5 inches. So you'll be able to pause, and if you want to recreate this, just pause and you'll get the dimensions. The last set of 4 strips I am leaving at 12 inches, so I'm not trimming those down. This is a very, very handy dandy tool from Sasha Creates. So it is mostly for bookbinding, but it's a right angle. So I'm lining up one of the paper strips on the left, lining the next one up on the bottom to create a right angle, rotating the paper strips and then lining them up once again to create square frames. So this tool is super handy. Just need a right angle tool to get your perfectly straight 90-degree angles for your frames. So rotating it, lining it up, and my background is going to be a plain white 12-inch piece of cardstock, textured cardstock. And for this last piece, I'm using the background cardstock as my template for placing the last paper strip. So I know it's perfectly 12 by 12 inches square. That is my first frame layer. Now I'm going to start with the smallest layer of the frame. So repetition, exact same thing, placing one strip along the left, adding liquid glue, and placing the next strip on the bottom, rotating it, add glue, line up the next strip to create your right angles, your 90-degree angles, rotate, add liquid glue or your favorite type of adhesive, and line it up. So it lines there on the left, and then line it up on the right with another dab of glue, and it should be a nice even Steven square. Repeat for all of the scalloped border strips for all the layers to create the pieces for your frame. So again, super handy tool. I love it also for making mini albums. I love making mini albums. I'll probably feature a mini album in one of my upcoming Paige's Page, although the article is called Paige's Page. But maybe we change it to pages, like the pages of a mini album. We'll see, because I do love making mini albums too. And I know a lot of you do too. So once you have your scalloped frames, we need to find the center of the layout so that we can start building from the inside to the outside. So I'm making a mark at 3 inches from the left and right sides, top and bottom. So that'll be at 3 inches and 9 inches, and then connecting the lines across. So, yep, make a mark at 3 inches at 9 inches on the top, right, bottom, left edges, and then connect the lines. And so this is going to be the exact size of square to place our first frame. So I'm adding liquid glue around the back outside edge so that the scallops can eventually lift and bend, carefully aligning it right inside my penciled square. The next measurement, just going to repeat for all the layers, is going to be at 2 1/4 inches. So measure at 2 1/4 and then also 9 3/4 from the top, bottom, right and left edges, and then we'll connect the lines. So at 2 1/4, at 9 3/4, at 2 1/4, 9 3/4, and then connecting all the lines. Now you could eyeball placing your frames, but I figure since we're measuring right angles and we're making it nice and neat, that we'll just do this extra step of measuring to make sure that all of our frames are layered exactly centered. So it should fit right inside that penciled square. Add liquid glue around the back outer edge so that the ruffles will be able to lift and bend once we get all of our frames in place. So flip it over, press it in place, and then we'll grab our next frame and figure out the measurements. So place it on top, eyeball it at first, and I can see that it's 1 1/2 inches on either side. So that's what I'll measure at 1 1/2 and then 10 1/2 at the top. 1 1/2 and 10 1/2 on all the edges. So measure at 1 1/2 and 10 1/2, and then connect all of those marks together. And that will create the penciled square right in the center, so we know exactly where to place the ruffled frame. The scalloped, border punch, ruffled, repetition, all of these different terms, but they mean the same thing. Different ways that you could use the scalloped border punch is layering the ruffles down the page. Add more colors, so you could use a completely different collection and use more of the colors. I only focused on the teals and the pinks, but you could certainly add the yellows and greens and purples. Use a completely different border punch or the deco scissors like we talked about that you've been hoarding. I know you have. All right, for the next frame, measuring, it's 3/4 inches. So measure at 3/4 and 11 1/4. 3/4 and 11 1/4. 3/4, 11 1/4, and on the last side at 3/4 and 11 1/4, and then connect all of those lines on the right, at the top, at the bottom, on the left, and that will get you your penciled frame right in the middle so you know exactly where to place the frame. Also with the scalloped paper strips, you could trim them into various lengths and then layer them down the page, and that will give you some white space around the edges for a photo. I should create a collage of all of the pages that I've done with this same scalloped border technique because I love it so much. So added glue around the back edge, press it in place, and then for the last frame, we don't have to do anything. We don't have to measure. It's 12 by 12, which is the size of the background, so all you have to do is flip it over, add your adhesive around the back edge. Slow and steady wins the race. Carefully flip it over, and then you can kind of nudge it into place before the glue completely sets. So you've got a bit of time to make sure all of the edges are completely flush, 90 degrees, and ta-da, friends, it's looking so beautiful. Once your adhesive has dried, you can go ahead and lift and bend and grab all of the scallops and bring them forward. And this is going to create beautiful texture, dimension, shadows, so you can really see the time and effort that you've put into creating these ruffles and scallops. And that few minutes that you take to do this step enhances it so much, just takes it to the next level. So I've got a photo of me and my daughter Jane placing it off center in the middle where you can still see the white cardstock, and then just going to bring in some layers. So a light blue tag to bring in the light blue, a journaling spot tucked underneath the right edge where I can eventually add journaling. My title will be Love, which is made with a chipboard sticker. And then just going to create some clusters around that title and underneath as well for some balance. My background is very busy, a lot of layers, a lot of color, a lot of stuff happening. So I'm going to centralize everything in the middle with just some clusters at the top and bottom for pops of color, pops of interest, and I always need more flowers in my life. So I'm just tucking some flower die cut stickers, mini puffy stickers. All these fun things are found in my Blooming Wild collection with American Crafts, and top it all off with a little mini puffy heart sticker. And I always like birds because my daughter loves birds, and at this venue there were bird nests everywhere and it was so fun. So that, my friends, is the finished page. I hope you are inspired by Paige's page to create some ruffles some repeated ruffles. Ruffles of repetition. There we go. Nailed it. That's what it's called. Can't wait to see how you use your border punches to create a similar page. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much for stopping by and have a great day.